Hey neighbor, welcome back to Year-End List Season on ARTV. My name is John, and today we're looking at my top 10 worst albums of the year. If you know anything about me and this channel, you probably know that I don't often go out of my way to seek out albums that I think are truly going to be awful. Some stuff just ends up on my radar or my listening queue because morbid curiosity, but also this list isn't just made for the most awful albums known to mankind. It's also reserved for albums that I feel are very disappointing, massive letdowns. Please watch till the end of the video because that's where I'm going to reveal some dishonorable disappointments that didn't quite make the list but I still had problems with. Thank you for watching, for hitting the like button, a like truly does go a long way, and subscribe if you're new in town.
You love somebody, got to let somebody know.
The British alternative rock and pop band Coldplay have some major messes on their hands with Music of the Spheres, possibly volume 1 of 2 or 3, and if this is an indication of what we're getting as they shoot for the stars with big name producers and some huge guest collaborations, then I'm sincerely hoping that they can get their shit together by the time we get Act 2 and 3. This just feels very ill-suited to Coldplay's actual talents, because as a massive Coldplay defender, especially of their poppier efforts, I know that they can do pop and a massive swelling hook so well, but for an album that's supposed to be about color, why does this feel black and white? Between the emoji song titles, horrible pacing that includes way too many interludes that just build up and go nowhere, it's like Coldplay are walking around a carnival maze of mirrors trying to find themselves, but they're actually more lost than ever.
Say that you a lesbian, girl, me too. Hey, girls want girls where I'm from, hey.
Drake is serving up the same stale, cold dish that he's been serving up for the better part of a decade on Certified Lover Boy. I think that Drake is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to stream trolling, like rappers who will bloat up their albums trying to get bigger numbers in their first week, trying to get more streams, but the songs actually don't really have any heart or focus or purpose to them. I'll give it to the record in the sense that it has a few instrumental bangers that do pop off, and I guess Drake does get in a few bars, but he's absolutely on autopilot mode. He's been doing this for a long time. The same stale, fragmented states of mind that he tries to push across as some sort of deep epiphany, it's just not there. It's a crumpled up paper ball falling apart at the seams.
He wants a breadwinner, he wants your dinner until he ain't hungry anymore.
I sincerely don't think this has ever happened before, because in 2018, my album of the year was Kacey Musgraves' Golden Hour. And here in 2021, at number 8 on my worst albums of the year list, we have Star-Crossed, also by Kacey Musgraves. In all seriousness, it does kind of hurt me to put Kacey on this list, but fair is fair. I think this album is a dud in more ways than one. It feels very homogenized, and to be coming out of the newlywed life to now transitioning to divorced life, I would expect there to be a big cathartic, emotional, pent-up artistic expression, but this, it just feels like it could have been made by anyone. Kacey relies way too heavily on tropes of the pop genre as she continues to move past the idea of just country being her calling card. It's a very watered down album full of lazy lyrics that don't feel personal to her. And more than anything else, I feel like this album is just emotionally disconnected. It's like somebody didn't plug their phone in to charge overnight, and now they're working the entire day off of a 20% charge. 20% effort cannot fulfill an entire album. So while I do have love for the very interesting cinematic title track and other cuts like Camera Roll and Cherry Blossom, this album continues to bore me. It's utterly forgettable, and I kept waiting for the switch to get flipped, like maybe it'll finally just connect with me, but that moment never came.
Don't wanna wait too late, I'm turning the page and learning to love. You're my starlight, moonshine, I'm burning sun.
You know what's almost amazing? How Maroon 5 just keeps sinking lower and lower and lower, yet they're still here like some sort of horrible comic book villain that the creators keep bringing back even though everyone hates them. Jordi, the album, got its name after their lifelong friend and manager of that name unfortunately passed away at a rather young age. Imagine this being your legacy, like how your name was forever cemented in stone. It's like going and getting diarrhea in honor of your friend who really enjoyed Taco Bell. This album is a disaster. They hop genres like a drunk man hops bars. Adam whines, hogs the spotlight more than ever before, and cashes in favors for guest features like some sort of fucked up Willy Wonka torture device that blackmails people. The torturous candy factory continues to pump out the sugary manufactured bullshit, but even the general public is starting to get a taste for what shit actually is, and are denouncing Maroon 5 more than ever before. The sophomore album by Pale Waves. Y'all already know I was anticipating this one, but I never saw this direction being the one that they just ran in with their entire heart behind it. If only there had been a semblance of execution to the idea, because I don't mind the retro wave floating back into the mainstream in some ways. There's a lot of aesthetic about this album, but it's a lot more on the design side of things than the actual focus for the music. Who Am I is a pathetic homage to the late 90s, early 2000s pop rock scene a la your Avril Lavigne's. Just look at the album cover and tell me you don't know that this album isn't going to be derivative as fuck. The production is terrible, the lyrics sound like they were thrown in a blender with the cliches of the old era mixed in with just enough Gen Z virtue signaling buzzwords to make them relatable. Pale Waves are the musical equivalent of playing a terrible video game emulator on your computer, so you can expect plenty of buffering, lags, dropped frames, and more than anything else, probably a computer virus too. I can't even call to mind a single musical performance that stood out to me in any way, like a drum beat, a synth break, or a memorable riff that just really stood out. Absolutely nothing passes the vibe check, and it feels like a worthless pile of dumpage that nobody really needed.
Now, Joe, do you think
In my review of this terrible, but not quite as terrible album, I said that I had sworn off AJR. This was my final full album experience with them until I heard that maybe they had changed their ways or had made something a bit different, and I'm standing by that. This is the last time. Where to even begin? I don't know if there's anybody else in the game right now that's better at tricking their fans into believing that they're actually unique and special and doing something so new and cool. Anytime they look like they're just about to clear a hurdle, like some of the tracks being okay, I was only mildly annoyed at Bummerland, and Christmas in June was totally fine, then they just toss in this unavoidable grenade and blow it all to smithereens. It's self-sabotage 101, as taught by the merry band of bros, AJR.
Yeah, it's like you were about to cry, and then a fucking witch cast a spell on your eyes, and now you're stuck with this feeling all day!
I think Hobo Johnson made a Hobo Johnson album for people who hate Hobo Johnson and think this is what he sounds like all the time. The man put out 2 albums in 2021, and I couldn't even get past the 4th track of the Alienates His Fan Base one, so yeah, Revenge of Hobo Johnson is the one that made the list. The entirety of this god-awful 10-car pileup is dedicated to his rambling, shouting, whining, hating the government, and crying out for help behind some thinly veiled lyrics as he pushes the topic of depression into the spotlight. The Revenge of Hobo Johnson is very hard to listen to, and it feels like his backing band, the Lovemakers, were more like afterthoughts than actually involved contributing members. I wish Frank, the guy behind Hobo Johnson, the best, and I hope he finds what he needs, but this off-the-rails exploit is not it, and while I've enjoyed his music in the past, this just feels like a parody of himself.
Strange to see you smoking marijuana. You used to do the most cocaine.
I thought solar power was supposed to be this massive renewable energy source. So why do I feel drained every single time I listen through this album? Lorde's fall from grace is a painful one, as she stepped out of the spotlight, understandably so. She wasn't necessarily built for that, and I completely get where she's coming from. But unfortunately for us, the fans, This feels like a contractually obligated album that the label said, hey Lorde, it's been like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years since you dropped something, maybe hurry the hell up? I'm not exaggerating when I call this the single most disappointing album that I personally have probably ever listened through. It's a total slog from start to finish. It's the same tired chord progressions, the same boring acoustic guitars, the same familiar melodies that Jack Antonoff is just helping float out there with his dime a dozen very mundane production that just, it makes it all feel drab, like I'm watching paint dry. Lorde's idea of satire is very far-fetched, and it feels like she didn't really hammer home the idea that this actually is parody sometimes on tracks like Mood Ring. It feels ineffective to that degree. It feels ineffective musically, and for 90% of the runtime, it just feels lifeless. So while this isn't a horrible album, it's absolutely a forgettable one.
I forget about you. I forget about what you said. I forget about what you did. I forget about you.
Car commercial core that's as void of a soul as a plastic bottle floating in the ocean. It's OneRepublic's Human at number 2. It's their often delayed, like 5 times delayed album. And I almost feel bad for any actual fan of this band thinking that they were gonna do something worthwhile with all of this extra time. Ryan Tedder has increasingly lost himself to become one of the biggest instigators of bad, boring pop in the industry. This is a 6-piece unit of a band. What exactly are they doing on this album? Everything feels so razor thin, like you could just grab the album, put it over your knee, and shatter it into a million pieces. Every track on Human sounds identical. It's a very hard feat to pull off, but they keep mining the same field knowing that there's not anything there, but they keep going with these horrible pop trap beats and these soulless lyrics that feel like they could be about anything by anyone. With sound effects galore and terrible studio tricks that Ryan pulls on pretty much everything he produces nowadays, I just have to sit back and wonder, why the hell does this album even exist? Pump the brakes for just a second, because before I reveal my number 1 worst album of the year, I wanted to cover some dishonorable disappointments, albums that either let me down or else I felt were bad, but maybe not quite enough to make the list proper. Controlled by Dima or not, this is a very inconsistent album that feels like it was derivative of a lot of other things, but it also had shades of redemption around the corners. But to know what they're capable of unleashing on albums like Trench and Vessel is to know how truly inferior this album is, not just by comparison, but by its rather mundane pop standards. Ugh. The Offspring just feel tiny and washed up by comparison to their former glory, and even as a defender of Days Go By, this is an album that just doesn't feel like they're doing it for the right reasons. It feels like they're finally putting it out and even including super old songs like Coming For You on the album just to actually fill the empty space, this long-ass gap in between albums. It didn't need to exist, and I wouldn't have a problem with The Offspring just becoming a touring band at this point. This absolutely wretched album would have made the list proper had I actually been able to sit through it more than one time in its entirety. But I just couldn't do it. For my own sanity, I couldn't do it. I fucking cannot stand Tones and I don't understand the appeal. I fucking hate this album, but for anything to actually make the list, I have to have heard it 3 times, so by my own moral standing, I cannot include it. Absolute snooze fest. I could barely hold my eyes open through it, and that is a recurring theme for Jack Antonoff in the year of our Lord 2021. We had Bleachers, we had Lorde, and we also had Claro's Sling, which I guess you could include as a dishonorable snooze fest too. This is an album that feels like an AI bot that's been programmed to learn what AFI should sound like with just enough darkness, just enough light. What should Davy's vocals sound like? Should we toss in a solo here? It, I guess, feels cohesive in some way, but it doesn't feel like there's any real meaning behind the statements they're making. Yeah, so some not so good stuff was floating just outside of the top 10, but let's go ahead and move right on over to number 1.
It's hard to practice what you preach when life is a beach. I'm hard diving.
Foul, wretched stench from the depths of hell. How did we get to this, A Day to Remember? Why did we get to this? A Day to Remember have truly embarrassed themselves with a sucker punch to the face of every fan that's been there since day one, and instead of winning over these new fans with their pop-friendly sound with the occasional harder breakdown thrown into the mix, They've tossed out some of the OGs that have been around since, I don't know, For Those Who Have Heart. Upon reevaluation, Bad Vibrations ain't bad, and I would certainly take it over this by comparison. I think Jeremy McKinnon sounds desperate for a spark as he walks a straight line worse than a drunk person stumbling out of a casino in Vegas at 2 a.m. The lyrics on these songs almost feel sinful, like some sort of horrible betrayal to what they once were, as they are creatively bankrupt, just drowning in cliches. I don't know if it was fueled by ramen, the need for a paycheck, or what it was, but this album has no right to be this messy, this inconsistent, and this tone deaf. High diving feels like jumping into an empty concrete pool and cracking your skull open. Fuck You Money is a total sellout and a half with some absolutely abysmal production to boot. Everything We Need is basically Jesus campfire music for hardcore kids, and then you have something like Bloodsucker, where I just feel this secondhand cringe so hard as they got bitten by the Imagine Dragon. Congratulations, A Day to Remember, you played yourselves and you also got the #1 worst album of the year. If anything goes like this in the future and you're planning to make more, a follow-up to your welcome, well, #1, no thank you, but #2, fucking keep it. Thus concludes my journey through the top 10 worst albums of 2021, so keep in mind that this was all just my opinion. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below, and maybe comment a few of your own worst or most disappointing records too. If you want to check out more of my year-end content, then check this playlist right here, or you can see my worst albums of last year right over here. All of my socials are in the description. Please hit that like button on your way out, and I'll be back soon for more on ARTV.